You know, one of my outstanding characteristics was the ability to argue. I didn't care what method I used, logic or sarcasm, but I always made sure that I won, often leaving my opponent red in the face after hearing some home truths which I'd used completely out of context. Now, for some people, this characteristic could be classed as a quality, but for a Christian, this attitude can never be an attribute. I remember on one occasion when I was going through a Sunday school teacher training course that the tutor picked out 6 students to hold a debate. 3 were to act as Pharisees and the other 3 were to act as disciples. I only wish that I'd been chosen to be a disciple instead of a Pharisee, because I was really upset at my capacity to leave the disciples totally winded and without a leg to stand on. You know, it's quite amazing how wholeheartedly we can believe in something which logic and reason can totally disprove. I remember coming away from that particular class amazed that God had enabled me to become a believer. I had a hard time at work too. I just couldn't handle being told what to do, and would more often than not end up arguing with the boss and walking out. I didn't mean to act like this. I just had this inbuilt defense mechanism that made me act unafraid when I was scared to death. The Bible says a soft answer turns away wrath. But throughout my life, I'd never known how to give a soft answer. Right from being a child, I was taught never to back down and admit defeat, because people will walk all over you. And my parents showed me practically that this was the only way to survive. I knew that my attitude made me more enemies than friends, but how do you alter habits of a lifetime? I was very fortunate to land my job at the advertising agency. Nothing about it was mundane. It was a job in a million, and each day held stimulation and excitement. It was through working at this agency that I found myself involved with modelling, beauty contests and all sorts of glamorous activities. And it was here that God used me to start a prayer meeting in the lunch break. But always at the back of my mind, I had this lurking feeling that it couldn't last, and that before too long my old nature would rear its ugly head and I'd argue with somebody important and be thrown out. I was constantly living in dread of God's grace being lifted from me. And although I didn't relish God's call to work for Him full time, I also saw this as an opportunity to bow out of the firm gracefully for perhaps the first time in my working life. So, for the next 5 years, I spent my time serving the Lord and working entirely amongst Christians. The only time I ever mixed in the world was when I was out in an area distributing tracts in houses or meeting people who passed by and coming into the church during a coffee morning. I had plenty of time to pray and study my Bible, write songs and record albums, and the usual topics of my conversations would be God, the church or Christianity. For a couple of years I really did experience what it was like to be in the world and yet not of it. Because I was living by faith, I didn't have a regular income. In fact, this was a period in my life when I was living off other people's benevolence from week to week. Well, a couple of Christmases went by and I felt really embarrassed not being able to keep up my usual standards where gifts were concerned. So I decided that this year things would be different. I applied for a part-time job in the local Asda supermarket, and I was allotted 12 hours work each week. I was then given my overall and my clock number, something which I'd never received at any of my previous employments. And I embarked on my first week with excitement at the prospect of working in a shop. During the course of this first week, I remember one of the men who worked there paying me a mildly crude sort of compliment, which left me both blushing and speechless. I wasn't embarrassed so much by what he'd said. I mean, sexual overtones are so much a part of male and female conversation in secular employment. What embarrassed me was the fact that I didn't know what to say in response to his comments. I could literally feel my mind searching for the quick-witted answers that came so readily to my lips at one time. But it seemed as though in such a short space of time I'd forgotten how to banter. A few weeks later, one of the female members of staff who'd taken a particular dislike to me said something which was really sarcastic and cutting. Now normally I'd have been able to give far worse than I received, but once again I found myself speechless, not knowing what to say. These incidents were quite disconcerting and caused me much thought. I certainly hadn't wanted to remain silent, neither had I wanted to argue, but somehow I'd gone out of the swing of my usual impulsive outbursts, and I had simply forgotten how to argue. I realised that for a couple of years prior to my employment in the store, I'd been mixing with Christians, where actions and conversations were all for and about God. Throughout this period, I'd not encountered sexual overtones and arguments during the course of a working day, because my mind, and the mind of others, had been focused on holy and godly things. For years I'd prayed that God would help me to keep quiet when I was being provoked, yet no matter how hard I tried, my tongue had been too ready with a quick-witted answer. Yet here I was, marvelling at the fact that I hadn't risen to the bait when provoked on these two occasions. I came to a conclusion that it's far more effective to concentrate on doing something positive than on not doing something negative, because without trying, God had changed me. Now, that's a miracle. If you really want to be holy, then find somebody who is holy and stick to them like glue. Maybe some of that holiness will rub off on you. God bless you.